Dr. C, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So if you don't mind introducing yourself a little bit to the audience, and kind of letting people know your background a little bit before we get into the topic, which are peptides.
Sure. Well, I guess first and foremost, I like to say I'm an awesome father. Got 3 boys that I raised that, it's all about raising your kids and then hanging out with them the rest of your life. And I think I've done a good job with that. And then I'm a physician. I'm an orthopedic surgeon, sports trained, joint trained, but my real expertise is cellular medicine, and specifically to what makes up the biochemistry, molecular biology, quantum physics of the cell, and how do you optimize it? How do you keep it in check? And how can I utilize all that knowledge to help my patients and help myself to keep up with my kids? So it just kind of circles around all of that and optimizing what I can do for people that have issues, metabolic issues, immune issues, cancer, and optimizing performance. So it all kind of circles around knowledge of the cell. And I've just been fortunate to been doing that for 40 years. And I'm 61 and I walk the talk. I'm all about training and optimizing cellular health.
Excellent. Okay. So talk to us a little bit about peptides. I'd say over the last, probably came on our radar over the last 10 years, but really over the last 5 years, we've heard a lot about peptides and their benefits and how they're being used. More recently, we've been using some peptides and have noticed some pretty amazing benefits. And of course, we're being monitored by a doctor, which I think is probably what you would recommend as well. But what are peptides and how do they fit in the medical market? Because I know some people can get them online without necessarily having to go through a doctor. Like, let's start with peptides in general. What are they? And then let's get into, how they're available and what they do.
Sure. So peptides are basically amino acids that are combined from it's a combination of amino acids that are either connected in straight lines, helixes, circles, whatever you want to call, the amino acid sequence. It's basically a signaling agent that is, in this context of what we're referring to and how this all started, is the context of these are signaling agents that the body's familiar with. It's how cells communicate. It's how communication between organs. It's basically the understanding of how cells talk to each other to optimize or adapt to the environment. And so peptides really, I introduced peptides about 8 years ago in the context of teaching to physicians to understand. Really, I brought peptides out as just a basis of understanding molecular pathways because they were familiar to people. We had some of them that we were utilizing in treatments and modalities, and then it just exploded. And so I think now it's just amazing to see where it's gone, when basically the whole context of starting the discussion of peptides was to really teach people about molecular pathways in cells and how they communicate. It just seemed like the logical step to understand that peptides are just natural signaling agents that the body's familiar with, and thereby having less side effects, less issues with tolerance or resistance to the receptors. It just made sense to start with that and go from there to start teaching about the utilization of these signaling agents.
What's up, everybody? It's launch week for the new MAPS Anabolic Advanced program. It's a brand new program. People are super excited about it. I'm going to give one away for free. Here's how you can win free access. Leave a comment below this video in the first 24 hours that we drop this episode. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. If we think you should win, we'll let you know in the comment section, and you'll get free access to the brand new program that everybody's talking about, MAPS Anabolic Advanced. Now, everybody else, it's launch week, so it's on sale. It'll normally be priced at $157, but you can get it right now for $97. Plus, we'll throw in 2 free ebooks, each one valued at $47 each. The first ebook is Advanced Training Techniques. The second one is the Carb Cycling Diet. So $97 gets you the brand new MAPS Anabolic Advanced program, plus those 2 free ebooks. This launch season ends February 26th. If you're interested, go to anabolicadvanced.com and use the coupon code AA60 for the discount plus the free ebooks. All right, here comes the show.
What were some of the original peptides that hit the market? And when they did you kind of see the writing on the wall? Did you know that it was going to explode like it has? Was it obvious the direction it was going?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so what people don't know is when I first started lecturing 8 years ago, I'd ask the audience, physicians, I'd say, so how many of you are using peptides? Nobody raised their hand. And I said, well, does anybody use insulin? Insulin's a peptide. It's one of the first incredible signaling agents that it changed life. It changed life as we know it. And that, just using that starting point to indicate the significance of these signaling agents was a great way to capture at least my audience at the beginning. And so, I mean, so we've had, insulin, oxytocin, vasopressin. We've had all of these peptides around for 80 years. They've just been progressing in knowledge of synthesizing some of these peptides that we have, and then being able to utilize them, study them, and look at the, clinical significance. And it's exploded into hundreds, if not thousands, of peptides that we're familiar with right now that have clinical relevance.
You said something really interesting that caught my attention. You said that they are signaling agents that the body's already familiar with. In other words, peptides are based off of signaling compounds that we already have in the body. Is this what makes them different than drugs? Like, what's the difference between a drug that, let's say, agonizes a receptor or antagonizes a receptor versus a peptide?
Well, yeah. So in this context, so we can make any peptide. A peptide can be any combination of amino acids. So we can make anything. The library is infinite. But if we look in the body, the human body, and we look at how cells communicate, how does a mitochondria communicate with the nucleus? How does a nucleus communicate with the mitochondria, the peroxisome, the Golgi bodies, all the things that make up proteins? Well, they do it through peptides. And peptides are basically, they're in and out of the body pretty quickly. They're signaling agents that could be there for seconds. They could be there for a couple of minutes, and some longer. And that's where science has gone to, where we can keep them around longer. That's why they're more relevant now, because we can make them hang around to do their job when we introduce them exogenously, meaning by pill form, nasal form, injectable form, transdermal form, whatever. But the significance is that the cell is familiar with the signaling agent. So it doesn't see it as a foreign, as some kind of foreign process of where we're forcing a cell to do something it does not want to do. These are all agents that allow a cell to use its intelligence, which is incredible and will never have that intelligence. It lets the cell have its own ability to utilize these signaling agents then to make decisions. As far as adaptation, like you guys are all about exercise and so forth. So what is exercise and what are you trying to do? You're always trying to have the muscle adapt to the environment of what you're presenting. And these peptides just help that signaling and communication between cells become more efficient. And at the same time, utilize substrates like glucose, fatty acids, proteins in a more flexible pattern so we can optimize glycolysis or oxidative phosphorylation or fat oxidation when it's needed. So we're not forcing a cell to make a decision with a drug. We're giving the cell its intelligence to make amazing decisions when they need to be made.
And so with something like this, is it safe to say that you would see less of a potential negative feedback loop or a tolerance or receptor downregulation, or some of the ways that the body adapts to drugs, where you tend to build a tolerance, or your body almost adapts and it starts to become, you need more to get the same effect. You end up with more side effects. Do peptides do less of that?
What you've indicated is basically when you get something that is hanging around too long, or something that's there that is not physiological. Okay, that you're introducing something that's non-physiologic. Typically, with all of these peptides, we're introducing signaling that's physiologic to get a physiologic response, not a super physiologic response.
Oh.
So we're introducing something that will not cause inceptor involution, will not cause immune reactions, will not cause tolerance, will not cause. It's if you use these correctly and you understand how to use them and the signaling of the cell, it's pretty straightforward with just letting, again, the cell make the decision on really how is it going to utilize a substrate and how is it going to make ATP and NAD. And it really comes down to that, into energy. So that's really it. And that's what's so phenomenal about now, and the craze of where we're going, especially pharmaceutical companies now. Their focus is on peptides because they're natural. They don't have to do they don't have to find the mechanisms because we already know them. It's now let's synthesize them. That's where this is going. So this is why it's exploding, and less money has to be spent, less research, and then less side effects. Side effects is the big deal with this because, again, body familiar with signaling.
Now, in terms of the hormone space and exogenous hormones, the potential for peptides in terms of being able to signal the body to produce this balance and get your hormones kind of up together naturally, is that their potential there in terms of less side effects, less dependency on exogenous hormones, and like kind of being able to pursue that instead?
Okay, that's a loaded question, but it's a great question. It's a great question because there's so much there that I could talk to you about 5 hours straight about. So let's just jump in and say, okay, hormone supplementation tends to always be super physiologic. So I don't care what anybody tells you. I don't care what anybody says out there. It is a fact, and it's difficult to monitor and keep. If you are supplementing with some type of androgen or hormone, it's very hard to number one, to keep it in a physiologic range for the most part, because the patient or the person always wants more, right? Especially in muscle building and so forth. But I'll tell you, and let me back up and say that peptides, depending on what you're trying to help the cell work with, and that is typically efficiencies. Efficiencies are in mitochondria, nucleus, DNA, transcription, all these things that we do to make a cell smarter and better. Well, that leads to improved testosterone production, improved growth hormone production, improved IGF-1 production, all the things that are important, in particular in what you're potentially interested in muscle building and recovery and restoration of function after training. It comes down to really efficiencies of the cell. So I can see people that have come in and say, hey, doc, I've got low T. I mean, I hear that all the time. And they could be their mid 30s, they could be 40s, 50s, but there's so many things that can be leading to that low testosterone that may not even low testosterone may not be an indicator that they're having these problems with fatigue and recovery and all the things that go along with that open-ended subject. That's tremendous, right? That's huge. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to say is you got to look at this from a really broad perspective of, look, you can take numbers. If you're dealing with a number, then you're done. You're not going to get anywhere making yourself more efficient or making, improving the efficiencies of the cell. It's all based on multiple pathways of working to get to a place. That has to do with improving acid-base metabolism of the cell, has to do with improving the microbiome of the body, has to do with, the circadian rhythms of your sleep. I mean, there's so many of these factors, I'm sure you guys are all aware of it, that come into play with recovery and restoration of function. They have everything to do with the diurnal patterns of testosterone production, estrogen, progesterone, prolactin. I mean, all of these things, and the master hormone, growth hormone. And that tends to be, if we're on the peptide side of things, that tends to be one of the areas that we really focus on first because of so much of the knowledge of what happens to endogenous growth hormone production. Endogenous meaning the anterior pituitary producing your growth hormone. And it cycles it anywhere from 3 to 9 times a day. Its interval pulses are 3 hours apart. It's all about how can I influence that master hormone potentially in being an influencer on other things like downstream IGF-1, on testosterone production, on other hormones. And, that has to do with age. It has to do with environmental factors. It has to do with stress, all kinds of things. So those are approaches that can be taken, and more specifically in elderly individuals, when you reach the 40, 50 years of age, I mean, at 50 years of age, you're producing almost less than half of the growth hormone you did in your 25 to 30 range. That's a significant amount of growth hormone where the anterior pituitary is absolutely able to mechanically produce growth hormone into your hundreds. And it's all about understanding what happens during life to influence that production. So if you can keep physiologic production of some of these hormones that peptides influence, so we're talking about hormones now, we can talk about enzymes, we can talk about DNA transcription, we can talk about RNA transcription, we can talk about any of these things of what these peptides can do to not manipulate, but influence a cell and how it decides, to produce, like in your testicles, to produce testosterone. I could just keep going. I mean, you can talk about gonadotropin releasing hormones. You can talk about kisspeptin 54, kisspeptin 10. You could talk about a lot of these signaling systems or signaling agents to help you, depending on where is this person at and what do we think is influencing the possibilities of why they're, in your case, why are they not recovering well? Why are they fatigued? Why are they tired? Why are they, they're training, they're doing all these things they're supposed to be doing. Why are we not reaching any of these levels? Why are we not getting the fat loss we want to see? So it's really just, again, using the brilliance of molecular pathways to influence those type of things that make a difference in the cell.
Let's talk a little bit more about the fat loss side and some of the most common challenges that we see, and what peptides are you seeing are benefiting that person. So you got a client who's stalling their progress. We all know that it could be a whole host of things, right, that could be causing that. But where are you seeing the, introducing of peptides being most beneficial for that avatar, that person who's struggling with fat loss?
Yeah, there's one in particular I'm hearing a lot about, semaglutide. I've been reading and hearing a lot about that one. Like, what's going on with these and how are they working?
Okay. Well, let me just back up and let me see if I can set lay the platform to then jump into the GLP-1 receptor agonist you're talking about, semaglutide. So fat loss is all about, it really comes down to, again, to glucose absorption, the utilization of glucose through glycolysis and through the full oxidative respiration, meaning oxidative phosphorylation Krebs cycle, to make ATP and NAD. What does all that mean? It just means that as we train harder, as we eat poorly, as we environmental factors, whatever they may be, stress, so forth, all these things influence the cell, what was called cell redox, and how inflammatory aspects of the cell can then influence the way the cell uses what you put into your body, like fat or proteins or glucose. So what happens is the body loses its flexibility. The cells lose the flexibility to make those decisions of, when do I use this substrate to make energy? And so what happens with fat loss is we tend to lose oxidative phosphorylation, meaning the most efficient way we can make energy is by utilizing fat. That's why, like, ketone esters are the hottest thing in sports, because it's just an immediate NAD, ATP production that bypasses everything. And it's just incredible. And that's something else we can talk about at some time. But the fat oxidation is so important in the maintenance of the cell and how it produces NAD and ATP. That's like people who take all these supplements and stuff, they just wipe out cell respiration. Too many people take so many of all this bullshit that just ruins the cell redox state, to where they can't lose fat, they become insulin resistant, they can't make muscle gains, because they think they're doing things to make the cell better because they're taking an antioxidant, where there's this small window of how that works. And, like always, a little bit of something is good, too much of something that's good is bad. And so loss of fat comes down to really just understanding those basics. And then, your fasting, your exercise program, all these things that can be beneficial, but probably the most, in my line of work, what I do to optimize performance and take care of immune diseases and cancer and so forth. You know what my biggest problem is? It's the diet. It's seeing this diet that's high in, everybody has this low-grade metabolic acidosis, and a low-grade metabolic acidosis is always going to influence sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass. It's going to decrease fat oxidation. So those are some of the basic things that you have to work on first. And then if we get into the peptides, then it's about optimizing fat oxidation. And so how can we do that in a controlled fashion? Well, as I talked about before, endogenous growth hormone is one of those things that we have a lot of data on and know how we lose it. We know how it's influenced by disease states, in particular, low-grade metabolic acidosis or insulin resistance. It lowers the amount of growth hormone release. So we can do things while we're working on a program, right, to influence a better nutrition, better sleep, and exercise, resistance, or cardio or high intensity interval training, using those in conjunction with, say, like a GHRH or GHRP type of peptide. We can influence growth hormone endogenously to release like it should, to take advantage of what it does. And that's all about body partitioning, improving fat oxidation, using fat as your main source of energy, letting you store glucose and use it a little bit later, and then getting that mechanism of, there's this mechanism of how insulin influences this PIPK, AKT, mTOR pathway of building muscle or building protein, making protein and so forth. So this has an influence. If you're improving efficiencies of the cell, you're going to influence mTOR. You're going to influence that process of protein synthesis. So at the same time you're losing fat, you want to improve protein synthesis, because on that side of it, the more muscle mass you have, or the more efficient the muscle mass you have, theoretically, and it depends on the type of exercise, you're improving mitochondrial capacity, function, optimization. So you're going to utilize energy even better, right? And so you're going to consume, that cell's going to want to consume more energy. So all of a sudden you've got this reserve of muscle, you've lost fat, and you've improved efficiencies of muscle to where you're thriving now on that fat oxidation. And so that's the beginning of, trying to help people in losing, 5 to 15 pounds of, and body partitioning basis, basically of fat to muscle. And then you can get into, so then it's gone into, you bring up the GLP-1 receptor agonists like semaglutide. So I started lecturing on that about 6 years ago on these GLP-1s. And GLP-1s at the time were introduced. We studied these as neurocognitive type of peptides that were involved in, we were looking at them in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all of these ways we could improve executive function, cognition, neuroplasticity. And what we found out is that people were losing weight. And in going through the mechanisms, we understood that it had everything to do with improving insulin and improving beta cell function in the pancreas. And then, okay, right on that, Big Pharma jumped on and said, well, diabetes is the biggest thing in the world. Let's go. And so the focus went off the brain and went right into diabetes. And so we had these incredible peptide agents that have been phenomenal in changing how we treat type 2 diabetes. And in fact, even some type 1 issues. But what was the side effect of these? The side effect was weight loss, because you were improving with GLP-1 receptors. So GLP-1 receptors like semaglutide you brought up, they're all different names, but they're all GLP-1 receptor agonists. They're made in the stomach. They're made by a particular cell that produces them based on when food comes into your body and you release this. Well, that gets influenced by disease, fat, all kinds of things. And so all we're doing is introducing more of that peptide to do its job in improving, again, fat oxidation. But it has many other pathways. So I haven't talked about what's wonderful about these peptides is it's not just one pathway. They have pleiotropic pathways, meaning many ways to get things done efficiently to make a cell better. And in particular, these GLP-1 receptor agonists are just phenomenal with their mechanisms of, number one, improving insulin production, but improving beta cell function in the pancreas, improving glucose absorption in the muscle, improving and decreasing muscle atrophy attributes that are there in the cell of the muscle. So basically they can they can decrease the effects of myostatin. They can decrease the effects of these muscle ring finger proteins and these atrogen ones that are like they're atrophy type of signaling agents that kind of grow as we get fat or as we get any kind of efficiencies we lose. Those things become more prominent, and it's why you lose muscle. So what's amazing with these GLP-1s is as you lose weight, you're not going to lose muscle mass. And that's incredible. That's incredible if you know how to use them appropriately and efficiently.
Do we have pretty good controlled studies where we compare somebody who is utilizing this peptide and then those that are not, and like how much muscle one loses versus the other? I mean, do we have research around that yet to like really to substantiate that?
Yeah, there's massive research. Okay, so muscle mass is always like the last thing where if you don't have the dollars for the studies, right, and there's no end game for the pharmaceutical company, your studies are going to be limited.
That makes sense.
So, right. But so all of the research in these peptides has been based, has has significant data on cardiovascular improvements, all of the things that we know are relevant in something that can be very healthy for us. So let me just eliminate all those questions. I mean, kidney, liver, heart. Right now, your question is great timing, because now it's focused on muscle, and the data is just coming out of, where do you start with all the studies? They start in a single organism, then they go into mice, and then they go into humans. And so now we do have human data that shows preservation of muscle mass, and it's incredible. But we knew this. I mean, we knew this before, based on the mechanisms and the pathways, because the pathways never lie. The pathways are always right. So we know, if you're activating, for instance, it only makes sense that if you're improving insulin sensitivity, and that means you're improving what insulin does in protein synthesis by encouraging this PI3K, AKTP, mTOR pathway, you're gonna make muscle, or you're gonna keep muscle. It's just, it goes to, as you guys are familiar, it goes to just the significance of the studies done on just stretching, and how stretching can keep muscle mass, because it releases the signaling agents that influence those atrophy factors or stop myostatin. So, but to answer your question, yes, the studies are there now, and they're progressing because of the importance of having a peptide that has such a significance in improving efficiency, but maintaining, the biggest problem we have, and as you guys probably are really familiar with in what you do, is as people are getting older, they want to, the best thing you can do is maintain muscle mass. Mm-hmm. And because loss of muscle mass leads to disease, it leads to loss of bone, it leads to everything. And if we can improve that, we can save billions and billions of dollars in healthcare. And so it's getting there, and it's getting better. And we've just got more amazing data now to integrate now that last phase of muscle, and they've gone back to the brain now. So the research is going more now again on, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and early cognitive dysfunction, issues like that.
Interesting, because what's blowing my mind right now is one of the biggest challenges with weight loss is the metabolic adaptation that tends to happen, right? So if you look at studies on cutting calories and increasing activity, and less strength training is involved, you tend to see muscle loss along with weight loss, because the theory is that the body's trying to match energy intake, right? So what you're saying is, through these GLP-1 agonist peptides, it's helping the fat loss process, but also maintaining your metabolism. In other words, it's keeping the muscle, helping your body burn body fat just by improving its energy utilization, this is remarkable. I've never heard it explained that way. And, as a trainer, I trained people for 2 decades. One of the most challenging things, and this was it, like if I could get a person to lose body fat and either build muscle or keep muscle, like I was winning. Like that was it right there. So something like this sounds like a total breakthrough. Is that how it's being received right now? Is this, because I'm reading about it like crazy, in particular the one that I mentioned, semaglutide. Is it making waves like I would predict, or like I would think?
Well, I guess it depends on what you're asking. I mean, let me break down what you just said really quickly, and just to say that, remember, with all of these weight loss type of diets, the most important thing you can do, that you have to do, is you've got to maintain protein intake. Yes. I mean, if you're not going to maintain protein intake, you're not going to make muscle, or it's going to be very difficult to maintain, because muscle needs protein. It's not something muscle makes. So you've got to put it in your body. And a lot of these diets lead into acid-base problems and actually low-grade metabolic issues that happen. And what happens with that? Well, the body has to compensate and maintain its pH. The way it does it is by taking amino acids from muscle, degrading it to buffer the slight acid change, basically the pH change. So that's why people lose muscle mass over time that's why diet is so crucial. And I'm a huge proponent of protein, but protein, right? Protein that you get in meat or anything like that is basically an acid. So you have to offset those acids with your fruits and vegetables to make sure that you're aligning that diet appropriately, or you have to take things like sodium bicarb or, like Alka-Seltzer Gold, things like that to offset that acid-base balance. So a lot of times when you're in these problems with people with weight loss and losing muscle, you have to address these pH issues or you're not going to go far either. So you change when you go into these massive, crazy diets, you change metabolism. You're changing things that are not potentially efficient for the patient. So you got to be very careful. You got to maintain diet. You've got to maintain protein, so that they can meet those goals. There's something. So you said, is this a craze? Well, it's turned out to be for fat loss, but it's done. In my opinion, it's nobody really understands. If you don't understand the mechanisms and why you're using it, and then how to count. So here's something else. This will be great for you guys. So as you focus more on this and you have clients with this that are utilizing it with their docs and so forth, the issue you're going to see with these GLP-1s is, okay, they improve fat loss. They help maximize oxidation of fat, but they also work in the brain by reducing appetite. So you've got to consider this when you're approaching a patient and you're telling them, well, we got to get more protein in you while we're working on maintaining muscle or even trying to build muscle and lose fat, because what are you fighting? You're fighting that person doesn't want to eat. That person doesn't want that. So you've got to find what are those avenues then? How do I increase protein and make it easier for that patient? And, I've always found that the easiest way to do that is not through these, whey and casein shakes, because what do those do? They fill you up. They make you not want to eat afterwards. It's really going to things like egg whites and things that are inexpensive, but you can get massive amount of protein in a small amount of liquid or whatever form. So those are just ideas. I mean, I'm just telling you, there's things that you gotta put together, because you're going to fight that part. You're going to fight that appetite part. And so those people, even though the mechanisms say you can't lose muscle with GLP-1s, well, I'm going to tell you, you can if you're not maintaining your diet appropriately.
Excellent.
Right?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because when I look back at all the clients that I trained with fat loss, and to Sal's point, that would lose muscle, that is the greatest challenge.
Yeah.
One of the number one things I would see with all clients when I would assess their diet, the average American just does not get enough protein, and they definitely don't get enough protein to build substantial muscle. And then if you put that same person into a caloric restricted diet, they eat even less. So you're doing something that suppresses the appetite that is beneficial for fat loss. But then if you're not eating adequate protein, we're still in the same predicament. So
yeah. What's funny about this?
Such a good point.
And what's funny about this is somebody who really has trouble with cravings and appetite, who really wants to lose weight. They're listening to this and like, hey, that doesn't sound like a bad side effect. It's going to make me want to eat less. But it's important. I'm so glad you said what you said, because you got to keep that protein intake high to, kind of maximize the muscle preserving effects.
Well, and the things you guys are doing by instituting resistance exercises needs to be done, or else they're going to lose muscle. You got to have some exercise. If you're going to do a GLP-1, as I tell all our patients, if you're going to do a GLP-1, you're going to lose muscle unless you do some type of resistance exercise, right, to just help signal to maintain muscle mass. So, but you have to get that protein in the best you can. And so it's a battle, but it can be done. And you can get incredible body partitioning. I mean, incredible. If you know how to use these things appropriately. And it's really, as you guys know, what works for one person doesn't work for the other person the same way. It's why you have to tailor everything you do to your client, to your patient, and in breaking through plateaus and losing weight, right, and getting stronger, all those things.
I really appreciate your balanced approach. Let's talk about, you had mentioned these kind of growth hormone releasing peptides or hormones like ipamorelin, there's tesamorelin, there's a CJC 1295 is another one. How do these work, and then what are their effects on the body with fat loss in particular?
Okay, so you mentioned, so what we look at these as growth hormone releasing hormone or growth hormone releasing peptide, which meaning GHRHs are like what you refer to as tesamorelin or CJC 1295, which has been bastardized by the pharmacies and everything. CJC 1295 really is not a real. It should be modified 129, but that doesn't matter. Let me focus on a GHRH is something that's produced by the hypothalamus that stimulates the anterior pituitary to start making growth hormone. It's a signal from the hypothalamus that signals the anterior pituitary, but the anterior pituitary does not release growth hormone right away based on that signaling. And actually, the anterior pituitary, that secretagogue that's there, that we want to produce growth hormone, is inhibited by something called somatostatin, which is another peptide. And that somatostatin increases as we age. It increases over stress. It increases with disease. It starts limiting the amount of growth hormone that can be released. Well, the ipamorelin that you brought up is a third generation GHRP, growth hormone releasing peptide, that is made. Typically, they're referenced after they're things that are actually released from the stomach that I can get into later, but that mimic that. And so ipamorelin is something, what its job is to influence the anterior pituitary by, what does it do? It inhibits somatostatin. It also increases the release of more growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus to the pituitary. So it increases the amount of growth hormone being made, but what it ensures is release of growth hormone within 20 to 30 minutes, which is really, you want to control when you release it. So taking a GHRH by itself is not the most efficient way to do anything. If you're really trying to work with cell function, and it gets into more detail, but that's why, like, semamorelin was one of the first GHRHs, and it had good data and it had poor data but it was based on the fact that you couldn't control how it released growth hormone. Well, with the addition of a GHRP like ipamorelin, you can control that release. So that release of that growth hormone will happen within 20 to 30 minutes. And, there's all kinds of things that people, diet still influences. When you use these peptides, you have to be aware of, after when you utilize, let's say you're going to do it, most optimal times are morning and night when you start with these. One, morning, because it's the beginning of the day, beginning of the circadian clock, beginning of circadian rhythms, beginning of NAD production, which is all about this NMAPT, an enzyme that is necessary to produce and make NAD. So this is very important when you time these, to make the most out of why growth hormone is important in circadian rhythms. So, and that being said, the growth hormone release can be influenced by, let's say you did an injection or you took an oral or whatever. Most of them have to be injectable though, of the GHRH, GHRP, like CJC and ipamorelin together. Well, you got to make sure you don't eat anything, because if you eat some carbohydrate or fat, that will influence and blunt the response of what you just did. Pure protein's fine, but other things like that you can't do. So you have to understand the nutritional aspects of what influences and how these work. And that's why you get people say, oh, this didn't do anything for me. I didn't get anything out of this. It's because they don't understand what they're doing, or they take too much. They go over the saturation dosing of these things. So it just gets, there's a plethora of information you have to be aware of to really use these effectively. So when you use that, your second question was, how does it help with fat? Well, it's improving. One of the main and incredible aspects of growth hormone release is its influence, and the fact that these GHRHs and GHRPs have receptors that they work on the cell also to influence efficiencies. It improves basically that thing I talked about how glucose is better utilized through aerobic respiration, meaning it goes all the way through glycolysis and through mitochondrial respiration. And so you're going to use fat. So it influences that. And then, just depending on the type of peptide you use to do that, which there are others, you can be very effective in working on not just improving fat loss, but by you're improving these mechanisms called AMPK. AMPK is all about improving autophagy of a cell, clean the cell up, make things better. Then down the road, you get IGF-1 production, and that leads to muscle protein synthesis. So you get part of autophagy, cell cleaning, improved AMPK production, and then you get the mTOR effects downstream of protein synthesis and so forth. So really fascinating stuff that makes such a difference in improving health and giving people the ability to maintain their youth or maintain their ability to train. I mean, I'm 61 and I train better than I did in my 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s, and I haven't stopped yet. And it's because of optimizing cell function. It's optimizing nutrition. It's optimizing sleep, stress, and training, right? Which is all physics. It all comes down to force, mass acceleration, and all those issues. But you guys, that's what you do.
It sounds like these peptides by themselves already improve the cell's function and have great benefits by themselves. Added with good diet and training, it compounds. If I'm understanding correctly, no matter what, just taking a lot of these peptides have their benefits by themselves. But if added with a diet that's appropriate with them, in addition to strength training, it sounds like that's where you see this like kind of mind-blowing type of results from it.
Yeah. So and that's a really good observation. And I'm sorry if I talk expansive in all of this. I really try to. That's a really good message that I can send to you guys to let you know, like in my field of where I work with very severely ill and people, post-COVID fatigue, all of these incredibly complicated autoimmune issues, metabolic issues. These peptides are phenomenal because, yes, they help with efficiencies. They help us get to where we can start improving problems that have occurred that may be structural or who knows what in the cell. But when you can take the next step and start improving nutrition, and then you're getting healthier, and then I get them into an exercise program, which is the end stage, right? Because those people can't do that at the beginning. It's incredible how they all come together to maximize efficiencies of the cell. So your observation is absolutely correct. And so in healthier people who are just looking to optimize, training, and that's where this all comes together. Nutrition and sleep is just as important though. And stress relief and exercise, and the right type of exercise. You can't, if you're not going to do resistance training, I just tell people, why are you training then? I mean, it's cardiac's great, but you have to have resistance training because resistance training. This is where all the information is going to explode also about how we keep seeing all of these new myokines and exerkines which are peptides that are produced by muscle by working on resistance type of training. And it only makes sense. It's just wonderful to see where this is all going and to see things like you guys are doing. I mean, these questions you're asking are awesome. This is what people should be. They should be seeking this out and looking and knowing that there are answers out there to help them optimize their lives.
You would really appreciate, Sal wrote a book 2 years ago, well, it's been almost 3 years now, called The Resistance Training Revolution. And you're highlighting some of the points that he makes in the book. So I think you'd really enjoy that. Now I'm going to ask you to do something I know is going to be challenging for you, because I understand how your mind works. Within all these great peptides that are out there, in your experience, if I asked you to give me the top 3 to 5 that you think seem to be the most beneficial for most people. And I know we all know here in this room that there's such a wide individual variance, and you could say one's great, but then for that person, it's not the best. But generally speaking, when you look at, all the patients that you've helped as a whole, what seem to be like the big bangers?
So your question is very similar to the questions I get from all my physicians I teach around the world.
Okay. I feel better about it then.
It's like, it's so funny. You get done after a 2-day seminar, you've worked your ass off, you just spit out all this information, and then you get somebody raises their hand and said, "This was wonderful, but can you tell me
can you sum it up?
Can you give me your top 3?" And you're just like, what the fuck?
To make you feel good about it, though, I think that's kudos to how well and non-biased you are about explaining the information. I could tell just by the way you communicate it that you're very careful about all the nuances. And I think that when you probably do these, people respect your opinion, and they just purely want to hear, what is your opinion looking at the general pop? What do you see are like your personal favorites that are helping people?
Sure. Well, I appreciate the question, and thank you for the observations. I want to just say I'm respectfully humble of everything. I mean, I make all the mistakes everybody else makes. I just happen to have a little bit more knowledge on something than you guys know. You do your work, you do your research, you can be just as smart as anybody else. And I've just been fortunate that I've been doing this for 40 years and I just know a little bit more. So that separates me a bit more, but it's all about, right? You got to put the effort in, you got to do all these things to make things happen. And so coming back to that question, I'd say the top one's got to be BPC 157. And BPC 157 has just been, it's an incredible peptide based on, and I'm going to tell you, there's multiple pathways that BPC does not have a direct pathway. It has all these indirect pathways in how it works. And it's a synthetic peptide that actually mimics something that's made in the stomach. I know we refer to it and say that it's directly made from the stomach, but it really isn't. It's something that's synthesized. It's very similar to a peptide that's made by the gut. That's a repair type of peptide. But basically, what I love about BPC 157 is the versatility of how many, because it's all about repair and restoration of tissue, that has to do with so much in disease states. If you think about bad microbiomes, and you guys might think of it as, I hate the term, but leaky gut or bad cell integration and leaky brain, blood-brain barriers. And BPC plays such a role in extracellular matrix function, which is a whole nother topic, a huge topic actually in recovery, repair, and hypertrophy and muscle building. That's where, if you want to focus on where the research is, it's extracellular matrix. And that's my big focus, is extracellular matrix, of where all these signaling agents have to go from cell to cell and outside, and they follow these actin, myosin, these filaments, and it's how cells rebuild. They got to follow all these little filaments, these pathways. And BPC has an incredible effect on improving extracellular matrix. And that's a big thing that goes bad in everybody, in pH problems and as you age, it's all about extracellular matrix. So, and BPC increases growth hormone receptors on the cells. So it influences those other things we talked about to be better, improves nitric oxide production. It has multitudes of pathways of how it works. And it's a multi-modality peptide that I just love I have used it for, oh my gosh, since it was first, well, let's say this, I've used it for a very long time, and I've never seen a side effect with BPC 157. That's a pretty incredible statement to say about a peptide and not see a side effect. And I just think it's got just so much, it's just got so many good things. And the most incredible thing about this peptide, and I've had great discussions with the gentleman who actually synthesized this peptide and in Croatia. He has the patent on it and developed it. And great, we've shared a lot of science together, but this peptide has basically minimal clinical evidence behind it's all based on animal studies. And we have very few clinical studies, but we have a few now. We have some that are that are active. But you'd think we'd have a lot more on this peptide and its versatility and how it's used in different disease states. Again, that has to come down to money and where can these companies make their money? And they can't make it with BPC 157 because it's out there. So that's it. So BPC 157, I like a lot. I like Cellular, which is a nasal. It can be introduced as a nasal. The BPC 157 is typically injectable, but can be PO. And that's a whole nother discussion about that. But I like Cellular because of its influence on brain-derived neurotropic factor and how it just works on, it seems to be anxiety is one of the biggest problems that we're seeing a lot of in disease states and in just life. And Cellular has really a nice place in working on efficiencies, not just the body, but specifically in the brain to improve this brain-derived neurotropic factor, which has a tremendous influence on cell neuroplasticity in the brain and cognitive executive function and just dealing with the world basically in a way that's manageable for everyone. So I love that. I love Cellular. I love its immune properties. It's got immune modulation properties, which are tremendous. So I would say that, and then I would say probably the GHRHs and GHRPs they're a platform to build from because everybody, no matter who you are, from the time you're 30 and then as life progresses, you're producing less alpha ketoglutarate, you're producing less NAD, your mitochondrial function's declining, you're utilizing less fat oxidation, you're increasing glucose tolerance, you're increasing insulin resistance. Is there anything out there that can work on so many levels in influencing the progression of something I've just called aging, which is the number one, it's the number one influencer of any disease, right? The older you get, the more likely you are to have any of these diseases, glaucoma, sarcopenia, diabetes, heart disease, brain disease, anything you want to say. Well, these GHRHs and GHRPs I think are phenomenal in how you can alter that course of life and efficiencies of the cell. And then, and so that's 4. You want 5. I would say 5. I'd have to say probably thymolin. It'd be either thymolin or epitalon. Thymolin is just an incredible immune modulator, and what is weight training? What is adaptation? What is it all about with muscle rebuilding and regeneration? It's all about the immune system. If the immune system's not functioning, if that macrophage isn't there, as there's muscle regeneration or muscle hypertrophy, and there are phase changes in the macrophage that have to occur, and in the fibrocyte, and in the satellite cell above the sarcolemma, if you don't have these things functioning right, I don't care. You're not rebuilding shit. And again, it all comes down to efficiencies of how those cells work. And these GLP-1s these thymolins, and how they help with immune, keeping an immune cell in the proper phase when it needs to be. Remember what I said, how a cell is naturally intelligent. It just wants the signaling agents to help it make the decision when it needs to. Perfect example. People talk about, well, we got an immune boost. Well, that's total bullshit. You can't, you boost the immune system and you're going to screw up your immune system. It's about immune modulation. It's about keeping it in sync, right? And that's thymolin allows through many different pathways that activation of these immune cells to communicate appropriately. So I'd say thymolin is probably, that would be what? How many did I give you so far?
That's five.
That's five right there.
You did it.
You did
Perfect.
it.
Dr. Seeds, really appreciate your balanced approach and how you communicate. And this really reminds me of why it's so important that people go through a doctor when they're using peptides. Because I know you can go online, you can find peptides through kind of some gray market or, kind of area. But I mean, these have real effects on the body. And, I just want to stress, you definitely want to work with a doctor who knows what they're doing when you're using these substances. And I'm sure you would agree.
Whoa, my gosh. Yeah. It's anything online is total bullshit. I mean, you have no idea. They haven't been third-party tested. You don't know, have they been tested for infection? Have they followed all the standards of why you spend this money for something? Absolutely not. And I've had I used to present the data of where I test those online products and show the docs. This is what you're giving to your patient. Are you crazy?
Wow.
Because none of them had, maybe if they did, they had 50, 60% of what they were really supposed to. But so think about this. Here's the best way to think about this. A peptide has to be 99.8% or 99.6%, which is the low point of what it says it is. Okay. It has to be that full peptide, because when you take this peptide, what happens is it gets hydrolyzed. It breaks the peptide itself to some degree. It stays intact, or it breaks up into its biological components. Well, if you have a peptide that's not pure, you have fragments that are breaking off that are peptides that you have no idea what they're doing. They could be hepatotoxic. They can be cancerous. They can be anything. And I've shown that in looking through specific testing, where you can look at the levels of what's in this peptide. It's insane and it's dangerous. And that's why you got to be really smart.
Wow, you just said something that's so important in regards to that. It's very popular for people to go online and buy testosterone on the black market. And probably the biggest risk there, aside from some of the, really ridiculous things, is just probably getting it watered down. But you could give somebody who's claiming it's 250 milligrams testosterone, 125 milligrams testosterone, and they'll still feel it, and it'll still have some positive effects. But what you're saying, if this thing isn't 99.6% of what it says it is, it's not only probably not working, but the adverse effects. Yeah,
you have no idea. It could have all kinds of weird effects.
You just can't water this shit down and sell it. It doesn't work the same way.
Well, here it's kind of like what you said, but here's the bigger problem is having 50% of that peptide in there and works, and the people feel it and they say, oh, it's working, but it's that other 50% that's doing. You have no You have no idea what it's doing to your DNA, what it's doing to create more what we call cell senescence, which is what's happening. You're causing premature aging. You're doing things that you have no idea are going to screw you up for the rest of your life, that we're going to have a very difficult problem fixing down the road if you stay consistent with that type of care. But the bigger things are what we see with like hepatotoxicity and what happens. They're horrible. It's horrible to see these things that occur.
Well, appreciate you coming on the show, Dr. Seeds. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Super enlightening. Thanks.
I had a blast talking to you guys. You guys are, I'm going to have to check you out. I'm sure you guys you had all the right questions. I love talking about things that I could tell all of you have a passion for what you do. And that's awesome.
We also have something in common. You actually opened up this conversation with your priorities, and ours are the same way. So we're all fathers, and we talk about fatherhood number one first for us, and then all the other stuff falls into order. So we have that in common too. So
we're definitely going to try and have you back
very
on.
aligned with you.
Dr.
Yeah, we're going to fly you out next time. So I hope you have the time.
Get you out in California here. Come in the studio.
Yeah.
This has been great.
Well, let me finish with this one thing. You guys will love this then. So all my kids, like when my kids want to come find me, when we want to have a family discussion, it's the garage is our weight room. And so my kids learn very young, proper technique, all the right things, but they learned that life was handled in the weight room.
I love that. I love that.
That's awesome. Thanks again,
That's
Dr.
so awesome,
Seeds.
Doc.
Thank you.
It was great meeting you.
All right.
Nice to meet all you guys. Be good.
Thank you.
You too.
Have a good day. Today, we're going to teach you everything you need to know to build a strong, well-developed chest.
When I think of weak points and areas that I struggled with developing for a really long time, chest was up there with the
Yeah, it was for me. It was for me for sure. I got more caught up in the weight I could lift versus how I was developing my body.
I think it's one of the most challenging muscles to develop for most people because the form and technique.